I am anxious to share with you what you see here on the screen, and that is what lessons do we learn from the resurrection. Now, we just celebrated Resurrection Sunday just a few days ago, and so I want to kind of tackle this topic and come at it in a somewhat systematic way. Before doing so, would you bow your heads for the benefit of prayer? Our Father and our God, we come thanking you for the majesty of this moment and the precious privilege that we have to worship you indeed in spirit and in truth. We're asking that you look out over the landscape of our lives, and if you find any item that is seeking to disturb our covenanted relationship with you, that you would move it in the name of thine Son. And now, Lord, in the words of antiquity and our ancestors, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart prove acceptable in thine sight. O Lord, my strength, even my Redeemer, might we all say, Amen. Well, as I shared with you just a moment ago, my title for today's sermon is, what lessons do we learn from the resurrection? And what I'd like to do is to take you down a particular path, and I begin by confessing to you that on last night in particular, I rose at the unsavory hour of 4 a.m. It is actually the next visual that you're going to see on the screen. I got up at 4 a.m. so that I could observe the funeral of Pope Francis live from Rome, Italy. The amount of time that they are in compared to where we are, the time of the funeral resulted in it being 3:30, 4 a.m. here. And because I have such a high regard for the papal office and Francis in particular, I think he is a radically revolutionary character for the Roman Catholic Church. I certainly wanted to observe and be respectful of that event and watch it live. And so I did get up at the hour of 4 a.m. to watch it live from Rome, Italy. Now, there were a couple of items that certainly impressed me by what I saw, not the least of which was what we would call the casket, but certainly was the coffin of Pope Francis. As I watched the processional, I found myself particularly impressed with the quiet dignity of the simple wood coffin that was used not only for the processional, but for the funeral in general. Now, I do funerals a lot, and I'm sure you come in contact with individuals who are deceased and whose life is being celebrated. And so I have seen a myriad of coffins and caskets, many that have been decorated, many that have been ornate. But what impressed me about the coffin of Pope Francis was the simple wood. And I have come to a point in my life where I have come to conclude that sometimes less is more. I have some friends who are very, very stylish, and they're always chasing the latest and the greatest styles to keep up with every fad and every paradigm shift that is going on. But here is the reality, beloved. The reality is sometimes simplicity is the best solution. And sometimes less is more. I am certain that with the wealth and the prosperity that's in the hands of the Roman Catholic Church, they certainly could have provided a coffin or a casket for Pope Francis that would have been ornate, that would have been decorated, that would have been elaborate, that would have been impressive. But watch this, consistent with his character and his personality, he chose a simple wooden coffin. Again, there was much more that was available to him, but he chose the quiet dignity of a wooden coffin. And what I want to say and suggest to you, beloved, is that sometimes we ought be content where we are and not try and impress and project ourselves to be more than what we are. And that's what this coffin casket is. The other thing that, as you see here on the screen, the other item that I was equally impressed with was the burial place of the Holy Father. Not elaborate or fancy, not a spectacle of wealth and materialism, but a place that was regal because of its simplicity. And I was particularly impressed with the name Franciscus, not a long titled name with all of the accomplishments that he has acquired and accumulated over the years, but simply his name. What a powerful lesson that we can extract from this event that took place in Rome, Italy. We are who we are, and it is the simplicity of the man. It is the down to earth of the man. He certainly could have boasted so many accomplishments, but he was a simple person, a down to earth individual that was beloved by not only the Roman Catholic Church, but even those of us outside the parameters of the Roman Catholic Church as well. And so as I watched the simplicity and the dignity of his coffin, along with where his eternal home will be, his resting place will be, that was a stark contrast to the images of the empty tomb that we celebrated just a few days ago. The empty tomb, and again, if you just move a little bit forward, there you go. It is certainly worthy of our attention and consideration. So this was an apparent contrast to the images of the empty tomb that we celebrated just a few days ago with Resurrection Sunday. And here's what I want to say and suggest to you, that comparing the quiet dignity of Francis with the images of the empty tomb that we celebrated just a few days ago, it afforded me, moving forward, it afforded me an opportunity to reflect and to think about what kinds of lessons can we take away from the empty tomb and the celebration of Jesus's resurrection. In other words, what does the resurrection mean for us today? Now, theologically and doctrinally, I understand that it is the purchase of our salvation. It informs our soteriology. It is a part of our apocalyptic view, and it is an inescapable part of our eschatology. And yet it is 2,000 years, watch this, removed from where we are. So the compelling question for me today is, what does the resurrection of 2,000 years ago have to do with us today? And now, again, this is apart from soteriology, it's apart from our redemption plan, but are there any practical lessons that we can extract and take away from the empty tomb and the celebration of, watch this, the resurrection of Jesus Christ? And it is down that path that I would like to explore with you and have you come alongside me and take a journey as it relates to lessons from the resurrection. All right, so I want to go, I thought, to a passage of scripture, and here is what John has to say to us, and I believe this is chapter 19 and verse 41. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden, a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. Verse 42, because it was the Jewish day of preparation, And since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus in the tomb. So here is the Johannine perspective and rendition of what we would call the resurrection. Now, this particular story, moving forward, this particular story comes to us from the book of John. And so that is what I want to talk about. The story comes to us from the Gospel of John. And in previous weeks, I've talked to you about the book of Luke and given you some background and statistics on the book of Luke. I've looked at the book of Matthew, and I provided you with an equal amount of statistics as it relates to the book of Matthew. I want to look at the Gospel of John. Of the 66 books of the Bible, the Gospel of John is the 43rd book thereof. It does consist of 21 chapters, 879 verses. It consists of 15,635 words, but that would be in the Greek version of the book of John. If we look at that same book from the King James perspective, we have 19,000 words. There are 161 interrogatives or questions that are found in the book. It is reportedly, tradition suggests that it was written by John, who is credited with having written the Gospel of John, the epistles that we refer to as 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John, and then the Revelation to John. Now, I've been listening to some of my favorite theologians like Bart Ehrman and Mark Goodacre and Reza Aslan, who have begun to speculate and argue and debate as to whether or not the writer of the Gospel of John is the same John of Patmos, who is the author of Revelation. Now, for the record, I am of that persuasion and opinion that the Johannine literature of the New Testament all share a common author. Here's what I want to say and suggest to you. Whether or not it was John of Patmos or the gospel writer John, what John here in verses 19 and 20 tell us is that Jesus was a part of what we recognize, watch this, beloved, to be the resurrection. Now, going back to my premise of my preaching and my sermon today, what does the resurrection have to do with us? And I want to offer you 3 simple perspectives, logical and simple perspectives of the meaning and the lesson of the resurrection for us today. Here is the first of the 3, and that is death is not permanent. So many of the items that have seemingly died in your life, like dreams, goals, and ambitions, are not permanently gone. With hope, they all can live again in your life. So let me say that again. Death is not permanent. I'm not talking about physical death, but I am talking about emotional and intellectual and psychological death. There are items in all of our lives, like our hopes, our dreams, our aspirations, our goals, that a variety of circumstances have caused to seemingly die in our lives. And so sometimes we metaphorically look at the graveyard of our life to see those items that seemingly have died. I want to say and suggest to you, as long as there is hope, there is the possibility that your ambitions, that your goals, that your dreams can still live. They are not permanently placed in a graveyard, but with time, the resurrection of 2,000 years ago suggests to us that there can be a resurrection of our dreams, a resurrection of our hopes, a resurrection of our aspirations. So the first lesson that I want to share with you today is that death is not permanent. Here's the second item I want to share with you. That is that death does not win. Just like the Pharisees, Herodians, and all the others who conspired to bring Jesus down, in the end, they do not have the final victory. The resurrection says that those who plot against you and seek your destruction will be thwarted in the end, because the resurrection will not allow them to win. All of us, beloved, have people in our lives who do not seek the best for us. And people who, under normal circumstances, don't get along with one another will conspire and conjoin themselves one with another if they feel or if they think it will bring you down. The Old Testament says that no weapon formed against you shall prosper. So the Herodians in your life, the Pharisees in your life, the Sadducees in your life, the Sanhedrin courts in your life, all of those who have conspired and come together to block your path, to keep you from your date with destiny, to undermine who and what you are. The resurrection of 2,000 years ago proclaims and reaffirms that in the end, they do not win. You can live and make your way through life with the confidence of knowing that in the end, those who stand against you, those who plot against you, those who conspire against you, those who scheme against you, they do not win. And then here's the final item that I want to share with you. And I pray this lesson and this sermon proves to be a blessing to you. And that is weeping may endure. Jesus died on Friday afternoon and remained in the grave for the rest of the night. The resurrection means that you can survive the ordeal of your night. My mother had a song that she used to sing, enjoyed singing, and the words were, "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning." Just as Jesus was tucked in a tomb and remained there all night long, eventually Sunday morning arrived. Whatever the circumstances, whatever the conditions, whatever the problems, whatever the challenges that have caused you to endure your night, my suggestion, my word to you today is endure the night. And yes, the reality is it may cause weeping on your part. But as the song that lived in the heart of my mother says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And I am encouraging you to endure your night, to make it through your ordeal, your circumstances, your challenges, your problems, because the morning is on its way. Yes, there was a Friday night, a death, a crucifixion. And of course, my ancestors used to say, and I can't say it the way they did, but they would say early Sunday morning, he stepped out on resurrected ground and declared with all power in his hand. The resurrection means that you can get through your night because joy is coming in the morning. Yes, we regard the resurrection as a miracle. And I talked earlier about my current attitude and perspective on the Gospel of John, and I so well remember and want to share with you that a good friend of mine, Eddie Lee McBride, I talked to him this week, and he shared with me a perspective on what we can appreciate from John's reporting of Jesus's resurrection. And I've probably told this story before, how my first year in seminary at Harvard Divinity School, I was taking a course, Introduction to Old Testament Studies with Michael Kubnin. Eddie Lee McBride was a part of that class, and he was very animate, and he was very physical and outgoing in terms of his praise of God. And he would just break out and shout anywhere, anytime. And of course, Michael Kubnin explained to us that the purpose of this course was to help us understand that many of the miracles that we thought had taken place in the Bible had not taken place. He used as an example that when the children of Israel crossed over the Red Sea, they only did so in 2 inches of water. That was not a miracle, but rather it was only 2 inches of water. Well, in response, Eddie Lee McBride started to shout and he started to dance. And Michael Kubnin, the professor, wanted to know, Mr. McBride, what are you doing? Why are you shouting? He said, I'm shouting because of the miracle. The professor said, I just explained to you that there was no miracle, that it was only 2 inches of water when the children of Israel crossed over the Red Sea. And of course, Eddie Lee McBride said, that's why I am shouting, because that's a miracle. Because if you're correct and it was only 2 inches of water, that means that God drowned Pharaoh and all of his army in only 2 inches of water. So when Eddie Lee McBride called me this week, he wanted to share with me why it was that he believed that John survived martyrdom in the 1st century. All of the other apostles and the disciples of Jesus, historical records show that they died a horrific death. They were either hung or crucified. They were skinned alive. They were eaten by animals. But John is the only disciple that enjoyed a natural death. I don't know if I want to say enjoyed death, but he's the only one that had a natural death, a death of natural causes. And of course, Eddie Lee McBride explained that it was because Jesus had given his mother to John and John to his mother, that he preserved. He put a hedge around John. John would not suffer as so many others had, because he had the assignment of taking care of Jesus's mother. This is what I want to say to you. God places a hedge when he gives us an assignment, when he gives us purpose, when he gives us something to do. He puts us in the environment and the situation. He provides us with protection and a hedge so that we can accomplish what it is that he wanted us to accomplish. It's with that said and done that I say to you, endure your night, because joy cometh in the morning.